Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and today we are going to finish stripping everything off of the Alfa. So as you saw the other day, I got rid of all of the suspension and everything out of the front of the car, the engine's out. Now we have to move to the back of the car and start getting all of the suspension out of there. Hopefully I can do it a bit safer this time. I've already talked to Tim, my local guru, and yeah, these apparently the springs are still difficult to get a spring clamp on, but there's nowhere near the tension in the rear spring, so I should be able to just get them out much safer and simpler. So first things first, let's get this thing up in the air and let's get stuck in. Okay, so working my way through, I've managed to disconnect one side, but the shock, the nut on the bottom of the shock does not want to come off of this side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lower the car down and see if I can undo it from the top and drop it down that way and keep it connected. Just to take any remaining pressure off of this spring. There's very little left on it, but I don't want to let it fly and grind this end off while I'm hanging under there. I'll let it loose from the top, let it down, and then I can just grind that nut off once there is zero pressure left on it. Alright, so I have the trailing arms disconnected, and the Alfa's got a very interesting setup. But basically it's got this sort of canvas straps that hold the rear suspension, or basically stop the rear suspension overextending. That's the limiting feature of the car, which is quite an odd thing compared to modern day cars. And instead of having like a panhard bar or something, it has this T-bar situation. So this mount that mounts onto the diff mounts on pivot points on either side of the rear, the rear end, and that's what keeps the diff sort of centralized in the back of the car. So now basically I have the diff is completely disconnected from everything except for this brake line, which I'm just going to cut to remove because I'm going to be replacing any brake lines anyway. And I'm just going to undo this bolt, lift it up, and then disconnect these straps, and the diff will be out of the car. All right, this big nut in here was a pain to get off. And looking at it now, is it actually a nut at all? No wonder, looking at it now, I spent ages trying to undo this nut, and then it turns out it's not actually a nut at all. It's got two sides on it, but that was just sort of stuck on this shaft and it wouldn't come off. And that was what made it really hard to get this out. But once it's done, this is now out. And yes, we have the whole rear assembly, brakes and everything out. So moving on, let's see if we can get this, this T-bar out. Okay, So all the suspension is now out. The next thing I'm going to go through and do is I'm going to try and remove all of the fuel lines and brake lines. I'm going to try and actually, they're just held in by these fold over clips. So they're pretty easy to sort of release and let down. And I'm going to release them all and let them down in one piece. As you can see here, this car has basically individual brake lines for every single caliper. So there's lots and lots of lines, and I'm going to try and let them all out in one piece. And if I can, I'm going to, potentially reuse some of them if they're any good, because it'll save me a lot of time. And as long as they're clean, they're no problem reusing them.
So many of you who've been following this show for a while know that I quite often have microphone issues, and this is no exception. But what I'm tackling now is a couple of these heat shields, and these heat shields actually have asbestos on the top of them. So I'm taking all the precautions. I'm going to spray them down with water first, make sure they're all nice and wet, and then try and keep them all in one piece, take them off using a mask, and get rid of this horrible stuff from the car.
Okay, so we're almost done stripping everything down. I'm sitting at the back now, and I have to remove the fuel tank, but the boot lid has to come off as well, even though I dented it last week. But let's take it off. I can repair it. It's a pain because I now have to repair it. So boot lid off, and then let's tackle this fuel tank. That was way more wrestling than I thought it was going to be to try and get that fuel tank out. It is now out. It doesn't help that it's got half a tank of fuel in it. But yes, it definitely needed to come out because there is a bit of rust around the back here. In fact, I might actually show you inside this boot and just show you how it looked a little bit okay when we first looked at it, but it's not as good as it first appeared. So we have a look in here. There's a little bit of rust hole just up here where the fuel tank surround goes on, but most of the rest of it, most of the way around, all looks pretty solid, which is not bad. But one of the things that Tim pointed out to me is that this panel across the back, if you're looking straight down on it, sits pretty much straight, but it should actually curve, and it doesn't. That is because if you have a look down in here at this panel here, it might be hard to see in the camera, but this all kicks up, and this should all be flat. So this is all being pushed in the rear here. And a big telltale is, have a look at that bumper bracket hole. That thickness there, that is all bog. So this whole back end is just solid bog. So I'm going to cut this whole rear panel off. You can see from Tim's helped me out and drawn some lines on here. So I'm going to be cutting that off there, and removing the whole rear panel. So yeah, there is still a fair bit of work to do on this, but before we finish for the day, I think we've got a couple more bits and pieces to do on the inside. We've got to remove those doors and remove those pedals, which I think are just sitting there now. I've just disconnected them underneath, so they should be pretty much right. And that's it. She is completely stripped. There is nothing left on it except for the doors, which I can't actually, I've just realized I can't actually undo the bolts because I can't get the doors wide enough while it's on the hoist. So that's going to have to wait until next week at least, because next week I'm going to start building the rotisserie for the car. So this is going to get a full rotisserie build, obviously, as I mentioned before. I have to build that rotisserie, and I have to use some slightly different mounting methods to what a lot of the cars normally use, because I'm cutting off the front and the back, and often you bolt it into where the bumpers go. You can't do that on this car because they're not going to be there. So I'll take you through all that. I'm going to do it the same way that Tim does it. And yes, anyway, that is it for now. So that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, in 1915, an entrepreneur, Alfa Romeo, took over the Anonima Armata Fabrica Automobili, otherwise known as Alfa, to build military hardware for the war effort. They produced munitions, aircraft engines, and compressors and generators based on the company's existing car engines. After the war, Romeo invested his war profits into buying locomotive and carriage plants, which were added to Alfa. Car production resumed in 1919 using leftover car parts from before the war. In 1920, the company officially changed its name to Alfa Romeo with the release of the Torpedo 2030 ES, and that was the first car to ever wear the Alfa Romeo badge. The car was aimed at the upper-class buyer, being 3 times the price of a Model T Ford. It featured electric lights, an electric starter, and produced 67 horsepower. The company's first racing success came in this car when Giuseppe Campari won at Mugello, and that same year an up-and-coming driver came second in the Targa Florio. His name was Enzo Ferrari.
All right, everything seems to be going to schedule, which is really great. The Alfa's completely stripped, as I said, except for the doors, which I've got to take off when I get on the rotisserie. I really look like I've been beaten up. I really need to... yeah, I need to stop rubbing my face with greasy hands.
It's just the side here. It's like you've got eyeshadow,
makeup,
makeup on. Yeah,
it's just Mrs. Jeff's been beating me up again.
Or you've been into my makeup. Anyway,
that's it for today. So, as always, like, subscribe, Patreon to watch the videos a day before everybody else, and it helps us out.
Yep, you get to see your name on the screen, and we will see you next time.
All right, see you
guys.
guys.
Anonima.